You are 22 years old and you are sitting in a Cessna 172 at a small regional airport in the middle of nowhere, and the ramp is empty and the tower is closed and the FBO lights are off, and the only thing moving on this airport is you. And you are reading a job posting on your phone that says, Night freight pilot wanted, must have 500 hours, own transportation required. You have 280 hours. You do not have reliable transportation. You apply anyway, because applying costs nothing and not applying costs everything. This is how it starts for cargo pilots. Not with a dream of carrying passengers to Paris. Not with a uniform that anyone notices in an airport terminal. With a willingness to fly anything anywhere at any hour for any amount of money that keeps a logbook growing, because the logbook is the only thing that matters right now, and the logbook is almost empty. The cargo world does not have the glamour of the airlines. There are no passengers to thank you when the wheels touch down. There are no flight attendants. There is no one in the back of the aircraft who chose you specifically, or who knows your name, or who will remember this flight as anything other than Tuesday. There is only the freight, boxes and packages and envelopes, and sometimes things you are not told the contents of, loaded by people who have already gone home by the time you take off. And the night, always the night, because the cargo world runs while the passenger world sleeps, because the boxes and parcels and medical shipments and industrial components that keep the economy moving cannot wait for morning. And the night shift of global commerce needs pilots who do not require daylight, or applause, or windows without frost to function. You get the job at 320 hours because you told the chief pilot you had 500, and he looked at your logbook and looked at you and made a decision that had nothing to do with the numbers and everything to do with whether you had the thing the numbers were supposed to represent. He needs a body in a seat. You need the hours. This transaction has been occurring at small cargo operations since before either of you was born, and it will keep occurring after both of you are gone. Your first aircraft is a Cessna 208 Caravan, a single-engine turboprop that carries mail and small packages between regional airports in the Midwest. You fly it alone, at night, in weather that would ground most general aviation pilots. You are paid $18 an hour, which works out to roughly $28,000 a year before taxes, and you are the happiest you have been since the day you soloed, because the hours are accumulating, and hours are the only currency that buys the next thing. And right now, you are completely broke in hours and in everything else, and somehow, that feels exactly right. You are 24, and you have 800 hours, and you have graduated to a twin-engine piston aircraft, a Piper Navajo, or a Beechcraft Baron that smells like 40 years of avgas, and hydraulic fluid, and the accumulated anxiety of everyone who has ever sat in the left seat. You are flying the same route every night for a small freight company that holds a postal service contract to move mail between cities the major carriers do not bother with. Depart at midnight. 3 stops. Back by 5 in the morning. Sleep until noon. Repeat. The romance of this schedule evaporates in approximately 2 weeks, and what replaces it is a professional stoicism that cargo pilots develop the way sailors develop sea legs. Not through intention, but through simple repeated exposure to conditions that would otherwise be intolerable. You are flying in ice and in convective weather and in fog that reduces visibility to a quarter mile, and you are doing all of it alone in an aircraft that was maintained by a mechanic you have met exactly once. The pay is $32,000 a year. The benefit is a logbook that is filling up and the specific and irreplaceable education that comes from flying in conditions that passenger airlines would never expose their crews to. You learn weather in a way that no classroom can replicate. You learn it by flying into it and through it, and by occasionally turning back because the weather has won tonight. And you learn that there is no shame in the weather winning tonight, because the freight will still be there tomorrow, and you need to be there too. You have one engine failure on a dark night over Indiana. The left engine quits at 8,000 feet, and you run the emergency checklist from memory because there is no time to locate the checklist at this altitude and airspeed, and you single engine the aircraft to an airport 40 miles away and land without incident. The adrenaline does not arrive until you are on the ground with both engines off and the cockpit is silent and your hands are shaking on the yoke, and there is no one to call and no one to debrief with. You sit in the dark for 10 minutes with the master switch off and your hands still trembling, and the only sound is the cooling metal of an engine that just tried to kill you and failed. You call operations. The dispatcher says, "Okay, what airport are you at?" You tell him. He says, "Okay, we'll get someone to pick up the freight." He does not ask how you are. That is not what this call is for. You hang up. You sit in the dark for 10 more minutes. Then you drive to the nearest gas station and buy a coffee and a package of crackers and sit in the parking lot in your car with the heater running until the sky in the east starts going gray and the night releases you. Nobody debriefs this with you. Nobody calls to check in. The engine failure will appear in the maintenance log and in your personal record, and that is a total institutional response. You put the car in drive and go find somewhere to sleep. You are 27 and you have your ATP certificate and 1,800 hours, and you have been hired by a regional cargo carrier that operates turboprop aircraft on behalf of FedEx or UPS, feeding packages from smaller cities into the major overnight sorting hubs. You have a first officer now, which means you are the captain, and the captain's responsibility is total, and the captain's pay at this level is $52,000 a year, which is better than before, but still less than what the passenger pilots at the regional airlines are making, and you are aware of this, and you have decided it does not matter. The lifestyle is identical to what it was. You work at night. You sleep during the day. You miss every social event that happens after 8 in the evening, which is most social events. Your friends have stopped including you in plans because you always say no, and eventually people stop asking. You are in a relationship with someone who works a normal schedule, and the relationship is under a pressure that has no dramatic source, no single argument or betrayal, just a slow and steady friction of two people living in opposite time zones while sharing the same address. You land at sorting hubs at 2 in the morning, and the ramp crews unload your aircraft in 20 minutes with an efficiency that is genuinely impressive, then reload you with outbound freight, and you are airborne again in 45 minutes, because the entire operation is built around a timeline that has no tolerance for delay. Weather is the only acceptable reason to be late. You learn to push back on dispatchers who have never sat in a cockpit and do not fully understand what a 600-foot ceiling and a quarter-mile visibility actually looks like from the left seat at midnight when you have already been awake for 12 hours. You are 30 and you have been hired by a major cargo carrier, FedEx or UPS or DHL, and you are going through type rating training on a jet for the first time, a Boeing 727 or a 757 or an Airbus A300. And the difference between turboprops and jets is the difference between everything you have done so far and something you did not know existed yet. The jet does not fly the way the turboprop flew. The jet thinks ahead of you by 3 miles at all times, and your job is to think 5 miles ahead of the jet. And this requires a reorganization of your mental processing that happens over months, not weeks, and cannot be rushed without consequences. You go to the line as a first officer on the 727, and you fly domestic freight routes and then international routes, and the world opens up in a way it could not when you were flying mail runs in the Midwest. You cross the Atlantic for the first time on a dark November night, and below you, the ocean is black and featureless, and the stars above are the sharpest you have ever seen, and there is no one in the back of the aircraft and no one at the destination who is waiting for you specifically. And it is the most alone you have ever felt in an aircraft. And it is also the most free, because freedom and solitude are the same thing at altitude in the dark, over the North Atlantic with a full fuel load and a functioning aircraft and nothing between you and the destination but time. The cargo world at this level has a rhythm that passenger aviation does not. You land in cities at 2 and 3 in the morning, the dead hours, when the airports are half staffed and the terminals are empty and the city outside the fence is sleeping. You never see the places you fly to in daylight. You see them in the amber sodium glow of industrial ramps and cargo facilities, forklifts moving in the dark, ground crews in reflective vests, the specific silence of a major airport at 3 in the morning when the passenger flights have stopped and the freight operation has taken over the building entirely. You are 35 and you upgrade to captain on the 757. The left seat again, the weight again. The freight version of this aircraft carries more payload than most passenger jets, and the routes are the same international corridors the passenger airlines fly, only you fly them at different hours. The off-peak hours, the hours when the sky belongs to cargo. You fly the polar route over Greenland and the ice cap and down the other side into Asia, and the polar ice from altitude looks like the surface of another planet, white and cratered and without scale, and you realize you are one of very few people who will ever see this specific view from this specific angle at this specific hour, and you sit with that knowledge for a long time. Your personal life has stabilized because you chose a partner who understood the schedule before she agreed to it and who built her own life around her own career in a way that did not require your constant presence. And what you have built together is not the marriage of people who spend every evening on the same couch, but the marriage of two people who are genuinely happy to see each other when the schedule brings you home. And you have come to understand that this is not a lesser version of partnership, but a different kind of it. And for you, it is the right kind. You are 38 and you have a child, and the child is the first thing in your life that has reorganized the priorities without your permission. You did not decide that she would become more important than the job. She simply was, from the moment she existed, and the job had to find a new position in the hierarchy it had occupied alone for 16 years. You bid for schedules that get you home more. You pass on overtime. You are still a cargo pilot. You are still in the left seat of a 757 crossing the Atlantic at night. But you are also a father now, and the two things coexist because you made room for the second one before it arrived, and you did not wait to be asked. You are 40, and you upgrade to the 777 freighter, and the scale of the aircraft is different from everything you have flown. 112 tons of maximum payload, a range of over 9,000 miles. You fly routes that the passenger jets do not. The deep freight corridors between manufacturing centers and distribution hubs, the supply chain arteries of the global economy that run at night and that most people never think about because the goods they ordered appear on their doorstep, and the mechanism of that appearance is invisible. You are part of the mechanism. You have always been part of the mechanism. The mechanism does not require you to be visible. It requires you to be there. The 777 crosses weather systems that smaller aircraft would divert around. You fly through the edges of typhoons in the western Pacific and through the jet stream winds over the North Atlantic that push the aircraft sideways and forward simultaneously and must be accounted for in the fuel planning before departure. You fly routes over Siberia in winter where the alternate airports are 500 miles apart and the temperature outside the aircraft is minus 60 Celsius, and a diversion is not inconvenient. It is a survival calculation. You have made those calculations. You have made them correctly. You are still here. You are 42, and something changes in how you experience the job that you cannot fully attribute to any single cause. The flying does not change. The routes do not change. The aircraft does not change. What changes is a quality of attention you bring to it that is different from the focused urgency of your 20s and the professional confidence of your 30s. It is something closer to appreciation, Not gratitude exactly, closer to the recognition that this specific experience, being this specific person in this specific seat, at this specific altitude over this specific ocean, is finite in a way you did not previously feel in your body, and that the finitude makes each instance of it more particular, more weighted, more worth the full attention you bring to it. You are 44 and you are in the left seat of a Boeing 777 freighter, and you are crossing the Pacific at 35,000 feet with 100 tons of freight in the hold, and 8 hours until Tokyo, and the sky ahead is black and full of stars that are sharper up here than they ever are on the ground. The autopilot is flying. Your first officer is running the monitoring scan. The aircraft hums around you with the specific mechanical contentment of a machine operating well within its limits. And you have been flying long enough that you can read that hum the way you read weather, as information, as language, as early warning. A change in the sound means something. A vibration that was not there an hour ago means something. You have been doing this long enough that the aircraft tells you things before the instruments do. You have flown through weather that was supposed to be avoidable and was not. You have had hydraulic anomalies over the ocean that required decisions made with incomplete information and incomplete options. The worst combination. And you made them, and they held. And you landed and wrote the reports and went to the hotel and slept and flew again the next day. Because the job does not pause for the weight of what just happened. The job continues. You continue with it. This has been true since the night over Indiana, and it has not stopped being true in the 20 years since. You're 50, and the company has asked you to become a check airman, and now you evaluate other pilots in the simulator and on the line, and you write reports that touch careers, and you have the conversations that nobody else in the organization wants to have. You have a first officer whose instrument scan has developed a gap, a specific moment on the approach where his eyes leave the primary flight instruments for 2 seconds longer than procedure allows. And in normal conditions, this gap is invisible and costs nothing. And in the wrong conditions, it is the 2 seconds that ends everything. You fly with him 4 times before you say a word. Then you sit with him after a simulator session and you describe exactly what you see, where it occurs, what it costs, and you watch his face process the information and decide whether to defend or learn. He learns. 3 months later, the gap is closed and you file a report that says so, and his career continues. You do this work for pilots who cannot be saved too, and those conversations are harder and stay with you longer. You sit with captains whose skills have eroded past the threshold in ways they genuinely cannot perceive from inside the degradation. And you tell them what you see clearly and specifically and without softening it into something easier to hear. Because honesty is the only thing standing between a pilot operating below standard and an aircraft over the ocean in the dark with no one else in the building to catch what they miss. You are 54 and you run the pilot group from an office at company headquarters, and 400 pilots report to you, and your calendar is full of safety meetings and budget reviews and regulatory sessions and conversations with the FAA and the NTSB in which the interests of the pilots and the interests of the institution do not always align. And when they diverge, you hold the line on the side of safety, because the line has to be held by someone, and you are the someone, and this is the job now. You miss flying the way you imagine you would miss a language you once spoke every day without thinking. The knowledge is intact. The muscle memory is intact. But the daily relationship with the aircraft has been replaced by the daily relationship with the institution. And institutions move at a speed that the cockpit never required and would never have tolerated. And you have learned to be patient in a way that 30 years of night flying never taught you. Because in the cockpit, patience was sometimes a liability, and here it is the only instrument that works. You are 65 years old, and the FAA says you are finished. And on your last night, you fly a 777 from Memphis to Paris one final time, and you tell nobody on the crew. You want to fly it the way you flew all the others, with full attention, with nothing sentimental getting between you and the work. You cross the Atlantic at 37,000 feet, and the sky is clear and the stars are sharp. And below you, the ocean is black and featureless and enormous, and you are alone up here in the way that cargo pilots are always alone. No passengers, no one in the back whose comfort depends on your smoothness. Just you and the aircraft and the freight and the night, which is where you have lived for 40 years. You land at Charles de Gaulle at dawn. The city is just beginning below you as you intercept the glide slope, and the runway lights appear out of the gray, and you touch down and roll out and turn off the runway for the last time. You taxi in. You shut down the engines. The cockpit goes quiet in the specific way it only goes quiet when the engines stop. A silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything the sound was covering. You do not move for a long time. 40 years, 20,000 hours, 100 countries, 1,000 nights over the ocean. Nobody saw you do any of it. The passengers who flew on the jets you trained on never knew your name. The people who received the packages you carried through the night never thought about who flew them or what the weather was doing when they crossed the Atlantic or what it cost the person in the left seat to get those packages there on time. You were always invisible, and you made your peace with that a long time ago, on some specific night over the North Atlantic that you cannot identify anymore because there were so many nights over the North Atlantic, and they were all the same in structure and all different in weather, and all entirely yours. Yours in a way that nothing visible to anyone else ever was. You pick up your bag, you put on your jacket, you walk off the aircraft into the Paris morning, which is gray and cold and does not know or care that this is the last time. Somewhere in a small Midwestern airport right now, a 22-year-old with 280 hours is reading a job posting on their phone, and the posting says night freight pilot wanted, and they are not qualified, and they are going to apply anyway, and they have no idea what they are about to give and no idea what they are about to receive, and the night is already waiting for them the way the night waited for you, patient and dark and full of everything the sky only teaches by doing. The same route, the same night departure, the same logbook waiting to be filled, the same transaction between someone who needs hours and someone who needs a pilot, and the sky that needs neither and takes both anyway. The cycle continues.